Hello everybody, welcome to Roundtable, coming to you live from Beijing. I'm your host, He Yang, and I am joined by Huang Shen and Tony Reed. Good as always to have you, our dear listeners, with us. We have some fascinating topics for discussion today and every day. On today's program, the hashtag employment discrimination against part-time postgraduates has been trending on Chinese social media. Do part-time postgraduates face discrimination in the job market? And if so, how can that be fixed? Also on the menu, in our weekly segment called Roundtable's Heart to Heart, we will answer voice questions from our listeners. If you have a question and want to pick our brains for a unique answer, we'll send that voice memo to EZFM Roundtable at foxmail.com and be part of our live show. But first, on today's Roundtable, the hashtag employment discrimination against part-time postgraduates has triggered a heated discussion on Chinese microblog Sina Weibo, viewed nearly 400 million times, and over 280,000 internet users took part in the discussion. Well, this is something that certainly started a little bit of a media storm as major media outlets have followed up on the discussion as well. And the general sentiment tend to be, well, we want to fight any sort of discrimination, right? But before we get into that part, please give us an introduction about the part-time postgraduate program.
Yeah, so here we have how does like a part-time postgraduate develop, the introduction of it. Started from 1981 on January the 1st, and China's degree system was formally established. And starting from this, the concept of spare time master degree had been revealed in 1983, 1985, and 1997. The country issued official documents one after another and comprehensively started the implementation of the on-the-job studying programs for master's degree. So at that time, the recruitment of part-time students was mainly divided into two groups. One is exam takers with the equivalent academic ability and the in-service staff. So we used to call it on-job postgraduate. So the original intention was to meet the re-education needs of those working folks in the society. So the working employees become the main source of the students. And until 2016, on-job postgraduates become a history, and part-time graduate degree was introduced. So on September 14th, 2016, the General Office of the Ministry of Education, they issued a notice on the overall management of full-time and part-time graduate students, which clarified that since 2017, the enrollment of full-time and part-time postgraduates shall follow the same policies, standards according to unified national requirements.
That's a lot of big words.
Yeah.
So, Tony, what's your understanding of this sort of reform and change of the part-time postgraduate degrees in China?
Well, my understanding of it is that you have a lot of working people who would like to go back to school, and at one time, I kind of flirted with that idea myself. I wanted to go back and get my my master's, but it's really tough, especially if you're married and you have a family that you have to provide for. So it's just, how do you find that extra time to go back to school? And I think that that's what this program really brings to people, that that option to be able to go to school and part-time and get that that degree that you really want, that's going to better your career. And so for me, I think that's it's a great opportunity, and it's really the only way that I could see that people nowadays can actually go back to school and help give them that boost in their career that they need. Because who can just drop out of work and then just go to school full time? So I think that this is definitely I think it's a great program to be able to get that your needs met anyway.
Yeah, that's such a good point, Tony. And I think this is something that many people who started working straight after graduation from college would come to that crossroad at some point in your career and life, that is, having an extra degree. Would it boost my career? Would it boost pay, future earning ability, that kind of thing? But also, you ain't getting any younger and you're moving on with life, right?
Yeah.
So then time becomes a luxury, and you can say this when you've got a few more extra years now under your belt after graduation. And it is such a huge commitment to really put everything else aside and
get
go back to school.
Yeah, I mean, your frame of mind is different too. I mean, you've gotten into, society where you're earning money and you're taking care of yourself. And then to shift gears and go back to being a student, I think that that's also a big hurdle, to discipline yourself, to make sure that you study the amount of hours that you need to, pass your examinations. And once you've moved on from that, I don't know, for me, I think it would be really hard to just go back to that student, frame of mind.
But maybe someone will cherish this opportunity more than they were just a pure student in campus. Because if they work in an environment that's more complicated and there's more diversity, sometimes it's hard for you to only focus on your job. You have to deal with extra things in the workplace. But when you go back to school, you can definitely change yourself into a student, that you just focus on your study and trying to reach a higher score, but at the same time, you have the financial support from your daily job. It just gives you a chance to enjoy the fresh air in a school.
Yeah, so that certainly sounds like you're getting the best out of both worlds of having a job, being a full functioning adult, earning your own money, as well as having that chance to get a bit more education and possibly enjoying a little bit of the student life, so to speak. But that indeed sounds like a picture that is a little bit too rosy to paint these days. And certainly it's interesting that in 2016, that's the year when we saw the latest reform of the part-time postgraduate degree. And now, 3 years later, it's not surprising that we're seeing so much discussion about it, because those batch of freshmen of the part-time postgraduate program, they have finished their program.
Yeah.
And now it is the time to review how they've been doing and how this program has been running. And what do we see in that regard?
I think right after the reform, actually students, they show their enthusiasm for this new degree system, because in the past, we have another term or another educational system, and we call it on-the-job postgraduate degree. So it's very similar to part-time postgraduate degree. At first time, I was a little bit confused about the differences between these two systems or these two degrees. But later I found out this one is more serious than the other one, than the on-the-job postgraduate degree. Because for this one, you have to, in order to get enrolled to the university you want, and you have to go through the unified exam papers and the recruitment procedures as the full-time postgraduate degree applications. And at the same time, after you graduated from your major, and you can get 2 certificates. And one is diploma and one is the degree, but just in one piece of paper there's a small line of letters saying you are part-time instead of full-time. But compared to the on-the-job postgraduate students, they only have the certificate of completion.
So you get a diploma for finishing the program, but also you get a degree. So you get 2 certificates.
You have 2 certificates just as same as the full-time postgraduate students. But the only difference is there's a line indicating you're part-time, not full-time.
Yeah, and that fine print is really important here, because that, makes the distinction between A to B. Or sometimes people say that maybe, let's say, if a full-time master's degree and you successfully graduated, well, congratulations, let's make it an A. And for this part-time version of it, then would you say it's a A minus or a
B plus?
B? See, there's definitely
a little bit of discrimination there.
Is it discrimination though?
I guess, I haven't done the master's program, but I remember when I was in school and I had this stigma of people who went to school part-time. I mean, I just, at first you're just like, what do you almost feel like they're a slacker unless you know what's going on in their lives. And so, but yeah, when you go to school, I mean, I guess traditionally it's always been that way. You go in, you have a full-time schedule, and you always look up to people who have more units or more credits that they're doing, per semester. And it's just like, wow. But then you have someone on the other side of the spectrum who's, I don't want to say doing less, because I mean, it looks like with these programs, if there's a certain number of units that you have to complete, it's the same. It just takes longer for the part-time. So it's still it's still the same program, but it's just done a little bit differently, but I think for people traditionally kind of feel like it's part-time, so you're not as hardworking as I am. For people who are in these positions that I guess can judge, and I think for employment, a lot of people or a lot of companies probably have this background where they have went the traditional way and have did college full time, and may have a bit of a bias towards people who do it part time, because again, it's seen as maybe this person's not working as hard.
Okay, so I'm really glad that Tony, you're sharing that somehow maybe a slightly biased view.
Slightly, yeah.
Yeah, it's just by the hair, and is existing in the U.S. As well, I suppose. But here, Huangshan, I'll need to borrow your expertise on this, as you've been doing tons of research. So yes. Do we see that this kind of bias exists here in China? And also, is the education different for these two kind of programs, full-time versus part-time? Because if there is a difference, then maybe the difference in treatment is not entirely.
So the bias is justified.
I don't want to say that, but Huangshan, what's your opinion here?
Yes, so I feel very sorry to admit that actually we do have some stereotypes here, because we can start it from the very beginning, like who want to apply for the exam of like having a part-time degree, because after the reform has been implemented, it seems that the picture is so rosy, so positive. But after a little bit of time, like the schools, the universities and colleges, they feel the pressure of enrolled enough number of like students who want to have a part-time degree, because like for example, like the Ministry of Education, they give about like 130,000 seats of the part-time postgraduate program. But for most of the universities in China, they failed to complete the enrollment plan, and it has become a common phenomenon. It's because, for example, the Shandong University in 2017, the part-time postgraduate program, they plan to enroll about like 1,600 students. The actual condition was enroll only about 900 students. Yeah, and also for some majors which requires very high level expertise, some applicants for the part-time degree, they fail to meet the admission line for the enrollment. Then as a second choice, and maybe the schools, they have to enroll some students from, they have to ask them to change their first choice major, or they have to receive some students from other universities.
So universities are under pressure to fill their programs, and sometimes would they lower their standards in a way just to meet the quota kind of thing? Because it's interesting to see that universities are kind of struggling here too.
Yeah, because in order to achieve the goal of this part-time degree, you have to guarantee the quality of teaching and education is as good as the full-time one. So when you like enroll the students into your major, you have to make sure their academic performance is surpassed the basic line of the requirement, right? And for some specific majors like engineering or mechanical engineering or some journalism and communication, in some universities they even like encounter the situation of zero admission because no applicant can reach that admission line.
Yeah.
Wow, zero admission, like no one got in?
Yeah.
Wow, that's
for
incredible.
some majors, yeah.
Yeah, that must be, wow, that's a really strict, I guess, requirement there. I mean, I think, as we mentioned earlier, I mean, schools really, they have a lot of pressure to make sure that they admit a certain number of students. And, to not admit any, I mean, that's a big surprise. Yeah, I mean, I've never heard anything like that before.
Or maybe it's just so unpopular. Maybe it's not necessary for a program like that to exist. Or, I mean, there are many ifs that can be discussed here. And certainly, if we look at the people who are interested in these part-time programs, according to the research that I got from Huangshen, so there are at least two, right? One is those who are part-time, who have a job and they want to do another degree. So they've got one foot in the job market, the other on campus. And there's the other type that's fresh graduates.
Yeah.
And so who are back in the day when you know nothing about about the workforce, the job market, and then you pursue another degree. But why are these young people not going for the full-time and going for the part-time degree, which we kind of know that it might be seen as the A- or B+ choice. So why is that happening too?
Yeah, as you introduced, there are two types of people who are willing to apply for this part-time degree. And I think the original flaw of this, maybe the system or this degree, is that it feels like it kind of stuck in the middle. It's not as good as the full-time one and not as bad as the on the job one, right? and we can explain, like, because for the candidates who is actually there on the job and they need to take the same exam of the students, the candidates who apply for the full-time degree. So maybe the difficulty level of the exam papers and the enrollment requirements are too harsh or too difficult for them. And for the other type of like a fresh graduate, maybe they never considered of taking this part-time degree test because they're too focused on getting a full-time master degree. And so they don't want to make, not sacrifice, but like they don't want to make the compromise to take the part-time one.
Or maybe they don't want to work at that time.
Yes, maybe some people just choose to further to study and apply for a master degree. It's because they still want to enjoy their campus life for 2 or 3 more years.
Yeah, I actually know a few people who decided to go that route, to just stay in school and get that master's. And if they have the I guess the financial backing to do that, I mean, why not? It's an opportunity to get a master's and then to go into the work force with that degree. But I guess back home, there's a lot of people who do the part-time program because it's more economical. You get the opportunity to work and just take care of yourself, and you're not dependent, or you don't have to take out a loan or something to pay for it. You can still work and you can take care of yourself, and I think that's really important. And also now it's becoming even more convenient where you can take some of these courses online, which means you don't actually have to go to a physical campus. You can sit at home and do your class. And I guess that could also bring some bias in some people who had to actually get up at a certain time and commute to a school, and they may look at this type of education as substandard. But it does make life a lot easier, especially if for example, in my case, I'm in another country and I wanted to go back to school. I could enroll and do my course online back in the States. So I mean, it's beneficial, but then again, I can see how people who weren't able to take advantage of this service now, they could probably look at that and be like, wow, it sounds good, but I'm not sure if it's the same kind of education, and I don't know, I'm not really sure how I feel about that, because it's convenient, but on the other side, for a master's program, you need to have a professor that kind of monitors what you do, and you need to consort with a lot of people, and it's a very integrated experience. And how much of that can you do on a computer? So there's this bias firing off in me, and I'm just trying to justify it a little bit, I guess.
Yeah. And certainly, I think this part needs a little bit more discussion, or just sort of we need to know whether the education is really up to standard, and also the way the program's designed, like what Tony, you said. I mean, this is different from the undergraduate degree program, and does it live up to what is being promised here? Because also you see for this huge discussion on the internet, on social media, there are some comments saying that when it comes to the employer looking at someone who comes with whose application has the part-time postgraduate program line written there, could possibly just be, casted aside, because it's not being valued as much. So I guess here, what I'd like to know from you guys is, on the one hand, educational quality, on the other hand, value.
I think it really depends on what you're doing. Like, for example, like teaching, for example. Like, I think that, to get a master's degree, this is an academic field. You have to do a lot of research, and, depending on what you're able to, put together, a lot of students are looking up to you in this role as a teacher or as a professor. And if you didn't, not to say that people who do these part-time programs don't do research, but it's a bit different, when you're remote and you're on a computer, as opposed to actually being full-time and, again, having to consort with a lot of people. So I could see how, a lot of the, the hiring board at institutions or universities would look at this type of degree and not really regard it, as the same value as, I guess you could say, a full-time program. So it really depends on what you're doing. It's hard to say that these programs are substandard, because, again, I would consider doing one myself, but at the same time, I think it depends on what field you're in.
Yeah.
And I think for the employers, they might need to be more open-minded and more inclusive, and they may get more information. I think for many employers, they may still confuse the part-time master degree with the on-the-job master degree. And because even for the master degree exam takers, and nearly a quarter of them, they even do not know the new policy. And I think maybe we need to give them more information, the media. That's our job. And even for me, before today's topic, I don't know the differences between these two terms. And also, we can clarify that for the part-time master degrees, they have to go to the campus. They have to receive the face-to-face teaching process, and maybe they can do that after work and also during the weekend time. That's a difference from the on-the-job one, because on-the-job one, you can receive the online course, but this one, you have to be in a campus by yourself, by person, and receive the teaching process from the professors there.
Very interesting, and definitely important information. Also, update for people who are, well, if you're hiring, then bear in mind there's a new policy that is out there, and also for those who are thinking, possibly, is this what I want to do? Well, we give you sort of a tip here, and you can go out and find out a bit more information on your own. And before we close this topic, I guess there is one question about this further education altogether that is, well, we've all been working on the job for quite a few years now. Do you think that, it's all that important to get that master's degree? Of course, I understand every individual case is different, but just ultimately you're going to come back to the workforce, right? And how is it being viewed?
Ooh, that's a big question.
I think the piece of paper is just more like a stepping stone. Like your employer may like to open a door for you to show your talents, and then he can tell you it's your time to shine.
Yeah, some employers really take that degree as a way to, promote or to earn more money. And I think sometimes people, have that in their eyes when they're looking to do these programs.
Yeah, sometimes it's a higher starting salary.
Yeah.
Yeah. But these days, work experience really matter a lot, especially if you have been away from school for quite some time, and that would mean a lot. You are listening to Roundtable, and we will be back after this break. Stay with us.
Informed opinion and heated debate. Find out what's got China talking, and join us for your Roundtable discussion.
You're listening to Roundtable with myself, He Yang, joined by Tony Reed and Huang Shen. Coming up, multiple wildfires continue to burn in California, prompting evacuations, preventative power outages, and a scramble for funds to pay to fight the fires. Who's paying for California's wildfires, and who should be paying for it is also a question. And in our weekly segment called Roundtable's Heart to Heart, we will answer voice questions from our listeners. If you have a question and want to know Roundtable's answer, as we have more than one people, obviously, devoted to answering and searching for good solutions to your question, well, yeah, send a voice memo to ezfmroundtable@foxmail.com and be part of our live show. You can find us on Apple Podcasts at Roundtable China, and 2 apps where you can check us out. That's the Qingsong Kelpin app and China Plus app. And now on Roundtable, as we continue our discussion. Wildfire season across the entire western part of America is becoming more intense and more expensive every year. The U.S. federal government spent more than $2.4 billion on fire suppression in 2017, and that's the most expensive year on record. And the costs are expected to rise further as climate change contributes to more frequent and severe wildfires, and we have seen that in the year of 2019. And, well, Tony, you're from the U.S. and California.
Yeah.
Yeah, so tell us a little bit more about the situation, because I suppose for a lot of Chinese people, we live in cities, and it's kind of hard to fathom living in the wild, and then there's a huge fire, and then you're running away from it, and all that stuff.
You know what? I really thank God I didn't have this kind of experience, but it's unfortunate that in a lot of regions in California, and thank God my family hasn't been affected by these fires, but it's really tough. I mean, you have a lot of these winds, and currently right now there's a fire going on, and they've only got about 5% of it contained, actually, and they don't see full containment until November 7th. So they're still tackling this fire, but the cost is just every year it climbs up, and who pays for the costs? Well, it depends on where it starts. If it begins on federal lands, agencies like the Forest Service or the Department of Interior have to spend from their budgets to fight the fires, often at the expense of other priorities. And, it's just when funding is not enough, the Forest Service is forced to shift funds from other critical natural resource management programs to cover this cost of the suppression. And for fires that start on non-federal lands, I guess states usually pay out of their own budgets. But in the case of a large or extremely damaging fires, they can appeal to the Federal Emergency Management Agency, which is FEMA, for help. And the governor of California has already secured FEMA grants to help cover some of the expenses from the latest rounds of fires. And it's just, and we hear a lot about PG&E, which is a really big company that provides electrics and power to a lot of communities in California. And recently they have had to shut the power off in a lot of these areas because obviously if with these fires they could destroy a lot of the power lines that are in the area, and with that they could really make the situation a lot worse. So you have a lot of people now that are without power for the past maybe 3 or 4 days. So it's just food's going bad, and it's a pretty rough situation at this point for a lot of residents that are in these areas. So it's just it's just an unfortunate situation that it's tough to contain, because it seems like when one fire goes out, another one starts, if you know what I mean.
Yeah. And when you see the numbers climb in recent years in terms of the numbers of fires that's broken out, and is that something that possibly will require just more money? But there doesn't seem to be as much funding that can sort of go straight to this purpose.
Well, it's tough. I mean, these natural disasters are climbing every year. I mean, there was a report from CBS that I was reading about how the natural disaster costs the U.S. a record of about $306 billion last year alone. So it's just a really and that's just, you have fires, and then you have like hurricanes, for example. Mm-hmm. I mean, with all that in combination, it's just really, really expensive, and FEMA cannot really cover all of these elements. Mm-hmm. So it's really, and that's just one issue. We have another, and that's just resources. California is facing the worst wildlife conditions in its history, with fewer firefighters than it had 40 years ago. And this is according to a group of lawmakers. And, the governor has, applied for, $84 million to beef up the state's, response. But it's, he called for about 100 and a large number of firefighters to come and fight. But, not as many were able to respond,
Mm-hmm.
So it was, only 130 respondents were able to come to the scene. And these fires, again, in 2018, about 100 people were killed, 22,000 buildings were burned over, and also 1.8 million acres. I mean, it's just destructive. And so these firefighters are just it's tough for them to be able to quell all of these fires, especially when one goes out, another one starts back up again. And it's tough. I mean, as a firefighter, I don't see how they could be everywhere whenever a fire breaks out, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, definitely. Mm-hmm. And I do wonder, though, and this is completely an amateur's, I suppose, point of view, but I would like to hear what your answer is, that basically when you look at wildfires, these are fires that break out in like a forest or a faraway land kind of thing. And is it absolutely necessary to put off these fires? Because in theory, in science, it's said that sometimes with some of the natural fires, it's good for it to burn a bit, because the natural environment it's like a natural course that some of the plants and bushes needs to be like burnt out for it's sort of part of the ecology kind of thing. Mm-hmm. But we're talking about folks that are living in that vicinity, then of course you need to save lives, and that becomes an issue.
Right.
So,
and I think that really applies to places that don't have a lot of, say, buildings and a lot of people living in those areas. If you're talking about a natural environment where a fire started naturally, say by lightning or whatever, and there's some burning that takes place. It's normally in an environment like where the rain can put it out, so the area gets adequate rainfall. Mm-hmm. But in California, rain very much. So this is a perfect breeding ground for fire. And in certain areas, especially the one that happened in Geyserville, which is going on right now, I mean the winds are really, really strong, and that's more fuel to the fire. So it's really tough, and these they call them wildfires is because you can't really control them. You can do what you can, with these firefighters, but it's just, there's no, once it gets going, there's not really much you can do, but just try to evacuate people and try to reduce as many casualties as you can.
And I think there's one part I don't really understand. So if this area is very prone to wildfire, should the real estate developers or the household stop building houses in this area from the very beginning? Or if you have to utilize this part of the land, and maybe is it possible for them to make the house are more
fire resistant?
Fire resistant. For example,
house.
you can have some fireproof materials to put on the outside layer, the facade of the building, and you have some special design for the house, the construction, and make it more stronger, to be immune to the fire. And just like Japan or some other parts in the world, which is easy to have earthquakes, they have the special design, and for the housing structure, use specialized materials to trying to prevent being damaged by the natural disasters.
Well, yeah, I think that Japan is a special case where they have been, it's a bit of an island country, and there's been earthquakes there for many, many years. And I think that this is an adjustment period for California, in that, if these fires continue to be, uncontrolled, then there may need to be some, revisions in the way that, houses are built, and certain places that that are prone to fires. And it's really hard to plan for that. I mean, it's difficult when you're looking at land. You don't say, okay, this area is prone to fire. I mean any place can really experience fire, just if it has the right tools, if it has the right wind, if the the land is dry enough. So it's just it's really hard for, I think, developers and for lawmakers to really plan in advance. And I'm not sure if there's, I've never heard of a fireproof home, but I'm sure that could be something that would give it sounds like a really good business in the future. But at this point, I'm not aware of any.
Well, I've heard of the fire resistant material of the layer that you can slather on your house as much as you can, I guess, especially when you hear so many
I don't know if that's going to work, but it's better than nothing.
Better than nothing. It can possibly keep you away from the fire for maybe an hour.
Maybe an hour of time, I guess.
The house will still burn down.
So it buy you some time, but you would hopefully be already on the escape and or at somewhere safe. And certainly for this discussion, not only do we think about the lives saved, or unfortunately those lives that are taken through such incidents of such, but also people's property. And once a fire starts, and in this kind of situation that cannot be stopped most of the time, then all that property that's burnt down and all the private possessions that's burnt down, is there any way to retrieve any value of that? Or are we just talking about maybe insurance kind of thing?
Well, I think at one time insurance was the biggest go-to for this type of situation. And this is back when these disasters weren't very, prevalent. I was reading on CNBC that prior to Hurricane Katrina back in 2005, the majority of costs of natural disasters were paid by insurance companies, and this is about 57%. And a lower share was paid by the government, and then anything over than that was businesses, state governments, and individuals. But now it seems like, yeah, the government pays for a lot of these, and maybe taxpayers obviously are maybe involved in that as well. And so it's just really, again, it's a natural disaster. I mean, all over the world, there's not really much you can do to prevent it. You just have to brace for it. And that they do have, FEMA apparently has, resources to help people. But again, with over 300 billion in losses a year, it's a bit tough to sustain this type of service for everyone. And every year, again, it's not going down, it's going up. So it's, it's a difficult time. I mean, it's hard to foresee these things.
Yeah, but what's contributing to this growing number of major fires that's taking place? And it's not just in the US. You're seeing like a lot more fires in recent years, but there's also, extreme weather happening in other places of the globe. And, Europe just experienced one of the hottest summers in recent history. So is extreme weather sort of the new normal now? I mean, and this is a huge scale thing, and not one individual can determine the outcome of such.
Yeah, you hear a lot about this extreme weather nowadays, especially with trying to reduce carbon emissions, pollution, and this type of thing. And we feel like perhaps we are inadvertently connected or causing this type of climate change. And but I'm not, when it comes to these natural disasters, it could be related, but it's really tough to say. I wish I had a bit more knowledge on natural disasters, but I'm not sure if it's related or not. I think that it's just I can't really say what can be done or why this is happening.
Yeah, and I think that if we only focus on this individual case, we can see how destructive the wildfire could be. But I think the root cause is still the climate change, and that cause more extreme weathers, and we can see the growing intensity and the frequency of extreme weathers now happen in all around the world. Like you mentioned, Europe just experienced the hottest summer, and last year experienced the coldest winter. And now in China, we see more droughts, floods, and typhoons. Everything just it seems like we are experiencing more of this kind of extreme weathers in our daily life. And it definitely will bring some unpredictable and immediate changes to the ecosystem and kind of hinder our management methods. And whenever we talk about climate change or global warming, we think it's a very broad issue, a topic issue. Have the international efforts, or you need to have the measures from the national level. It's not a thing for the individual. It feels like being an individual, I can do nothing to stop this trend. I can do nothing to improve the situation, to protect our ecosystem and the biodiversity. But actually you could. From the small steps, you can make a huge contribution. I think there's a lot of we can do, even though we cannot prevent maybe the wildfire, but we can do some small things to improve the situation. Yeah, because for example, we can make our commute much greener. You just by taking the public transportation, actually you're contributing to the climate. And also maybe you can start it with sorting out the garbage and creating less waste. Everything just a small gesture and a very small action. Actually, maybe if everyone could do that by gathering efforts, you can prevent or just slow down such natural disasters.
Well, yeah, here's hoping. I mean, that's I think it's really tough to slow down hurricanes and fires by being being more ecologically friendly. But it's definitely something that we can do as people, as nations, and try to reduce these types of situations. But it's really tough to deal with, I'd say.
This is definitely something that it feels far away, but actually it's possibly just outside of your front door an issue, as we can see with the fires that breakout in California, and also, the floods that we've experienced here in China during this summer, and definitely something that is worthwhile thinking about. And I would like to agree with Huang Shen. I would still carry that hope in me. That is, this needs our efforts on every individual's level to make the world a better place, possibly tomorrow. You're listening to Roundtable. Coming up next, let's get close and cozy. It's time to have our Roundtable moment of heart to heart.
You ask.
We answer. Roundtable. Heart to heart.
Who's got a question for Roundtable?
My name is Eli. I'm originally from Orlando, Florida, in the USA. And I guess one question that I've been, that's been on my mind recently as an expat in China is considering, the progress that China has seen economically and geopolitically, where do expats in China fit into all this? What's the future of foreign employment looking like and the foreign workforce in China looking like? And finally, the expats that have been here or are currently here, what's their role in all of this, in the economic progression and the geopolitical progression of China?
Thank you so much, Eli, for your question, and it's a great one. There's so much to unpack and to talk about here. So, Huang Shen, what is your insight in this?
I think now we are welcoming more foreign expats to work and live in China because we can see each country has its advantages. And so we really hope more foreigners can bring their special expertise to contribute to the development and the improvement of China's society. And I have to say that in terms of the foreign workforce, we can definitely see that now China's continuously increasing the threshold for the foreign employees. And I think the foreign employees, when they have some really excellent performances in a certain field, they will have a really good job prospect in the country. And also I think for their role, they're more like the bridge. It's like bridging the Chinese culture with the Western culture because it gives the Chinese staff a chance to work with people from a foreign country. You can have a more international working environment if you work in multicultural environment. This is the perfect thing. Sometimes we need a foreigner to give us a different fusion of the atmosphere. And also at the same time, when this foreigner, when they go back to your home country, they can tell what is really happening in China. Not sometimes you will learn a different country's culture, values from textbooks, from, pop cultures or from some soft powers. But I think that person to person, the personal exchange is the best way to spreading or to try introducing your culture to the outside world.
Certainly, I do see throughout my professional life and by reading history books that there has long been a relationship and friendship between China and those who are not originally from China but coming to this country and making huge contribution to society and also in their line of work. And it all started, and this could be fiction, Marco Polo.
Oh boy.
But I mean, there's definitely a discussion about whether this man actually did come to China or not. Now, just looking at his book supposedly written by him, but but there has been increasingly, I think, more interaction between China and those who are not originally from this country. So I think it's so important, and it has proven time and time again to have this foreign expertise to come to China. And nowadays, with so many Chinese, especially in the business world, I believe that opening up and a lot of companies looking for true talent. sometimes it doesn't matter where you are from as long as you can bring the expertise and what works to your advantage, right? If you're not originally from China, if you're speaking a different language, and then these companies heavily rely on these professionals to enrich their own practice here in China, but also, very importantly, to expand to other countries. So I think there is definitely a lot of opportunities in that regard. And there are some jobs here within this country that we need foreign expertise.
Just like our show.
Exactly. And I'm looking at Tony. I'm trying to establish eye contact with this guy. And he's just looking somewhere else. So, yeah, Tony. I mean, you're a vital role to Roundtable, for example, today's show. So I think there's definitely a lot of opportunities in that regard. But at the same time, I would like also to highlight one thing that is an observation from me, and I'd like to hear what, Tony, you feel about it, is that now after 40 years of reform and opening up in China, I think there's also maybe a higher requirement of what is deemed as talent for domestic and international folks. So I think now maybe you kind of need to prove yourself a little bit more with definitely the right diploma, degrees, and work experience, and clean record of no criminal history. I mean, that runs for everybody.
Yeah.
So, like, you know, those things are stricter. I believe that, you know, you gotta follow the rules to get the job.
And that's the big observation that I've seen, is that there has been more emphasis on credentials nowadays. And I think that that's the way, I mean, when a country develops, I think that this is very important to make sure that you're getting quality people to come in and do the job. And I've worked with some individuals who I've questioned how they were able to get the job in the past. So I'm glad that some of these, you know, policies are being enforced, and that some of these, you know, I guess credentials are being made sure that it's, you know, it's part of this person or the candidate's, you know, resume, because, you know, it's becoming more and more competitive here in China. And I think that that's a really, it's great for foreigners who want to come, and I think there's a lot of opportunity in living here. I've been able to experience a lot of things that I wouldn't be able to experience back home in the States. So I think that for a lot of people, I mean, my experience here, I mean, I typically share with a lot of people that I know, and that they, you know, they experience that. You have to really get a kind of like what Huangshan was mentioning earlier about, you have to, you know, experience it yourself. You know, a lot of people kind of sit back and hear what other people say and what they see on TV or whatever. But this experience, you know, when you get it yourself, it's really eye opening. And I think that a lot of people can have just a completely different experience. I don't know how else to say it, but just a different experience. You know, you have the American experience because I'm from the States, and then coming to China, it was just completely different, and I wouldn't change it for anything. It was really, it's like living a different life. I guess you could put it that way.
Yeah, that's so interesting. And the fact that we've kept you for quite some time, and voluntarily, okay, coming from Tony, and I don't sense that changing in the near future. Correct me if I'm wrong, Tony. We haven't really compared notes before this, the live show. So, I mean, that makes me really happy, because especially in my occupation, I truly value the input that our international colleagues have brought to Roundtable, and to enriching my understanding and view on the world. So appreciate your expertise and input, needless to say, and I hope we answered your question. And that's it for today's Roundtable. We'll see you next time.